YouTube was good. In today's video, we're gonna be doing a review for the Fey Dominion commander deck from Wilds of Eldraine. The purpose of today's video is to go over this commander deck specifically for new players so that you guys can decide whether spending money on this commander deck is worth it. And look, looking at this picture right over here, dude, I can already tell this deck is gonna be strong. This seems like a fairy tribal commander deck, and whenever we have commander decks of tribes over the many years when I've been purchasing commander decks, those decks always tend to be some of the most popular that they release. I know this deck is normally going to be selling for $35, but I have a gut feeling it's going to cost more than $35 for this deck. First thing we always go over is the commander for this commander deck, and the commander is Tegwyll, Duke of Splendor. I'm assuming she has flying, death touch. Other fairies you control get +1/+1. Whenever another fairy you control dies, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. So fairies and we want our fairies to die. I'm assuming if this has other fairies you control, I'm assuming this is going to be a commander deck where you're making a ton of 1/1 fairy tokens potentially and attacking with those, because if we are not playing a token deck and we're having our fairies die so we can draw cards, that would seem kind of whack, but we'll see. First card is a Fairy Seer. Okay, 1 mana, flying, enters the battlefield, scry 2. Okay, a Cloud of Fairies for 2 mana. This is going to enter the battlefield and untap up to 2 lands. The skilled players watching this video, I have a feeling that this card can go infinite. If you can find out an infinite combo for this card, please put it in the comment section below and write it in a way that's easy for new players to understand. And thank you in advance. We have a Hypnotic Sprite. This is also an instant spell, so you can cast this as an instant to counter a spell with mana cost 3 or less. We have a Night Veil Sprite. Whenever Night Veil Sprite attacks, we can just surveil once. We look at the top card of our library. If we like it, we can keep it there. Otherwise, we could just put it into our graveyard. We have Obira, Dreaming Duelist, Flash, flying. Whenever another fairy enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life. So going back to the thing where I said we're playing fairy tokens, putting a ton of tokens onto the battlefield, each opponent losing 1 life. And if you can figure out a way to put a fairy into the battlefield infinitely, like we potentially do with the Cloud of Fairies that we talked about earlier, going infinite, you may be able to just on that same turn beat everyone, just win the entire game. Picklock Prankster, Flying Vigilance. This is an instant that says mill 4 cards, then put an instant, sorcery, or fairy card from among them into your hand. Okay, you can get a creature back for 2 mana. It's not bad. Quickling, 2 mana, Flash. Okay, so we see a lot of Flash over here. So just so you know, new players, Flash means that you're playing, I can cast this creature on my opponent's turn, which is a thing. So it also has flying. Whenever Quickling or when Quickling enters the battlefield, sacrifice it unless you return another creature you control to its owner's hand. Okay, so somebody targets your commander with removal, you can just play Quickling to put your commander back into your hand to save it. A Brazen Borrower. Okay, you can spend 2 to return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. It does have flash and flying. This is a $10 card. This is a pretty competitive card in other formats. Oh, the art on this card is wild. A Fairy Blade Crafter, flying. Whenever 1 or more fairies you control deal combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 count on Fairy Blade Crafter. When Fairy Blade Crafter dies, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is its power. Okay, so a lot of these, when this thing dies, you lose life and they gain life. Guys, that, for new players, that's a term or strategy called aristocrats. Whenever you're causing people to lose life by 1, little by little, over the course of the game. And I'll tell you that aristocrats tends to be one of the most powerful strategies in Commander, because you completely avoid the combat step. You can just deal damage indiscriminately whenever you want, essentially, when you set up things properly. We have Halo Forager. When this enters the battlefield, you can pay any amount of mana. When you do, you can cast target instant or sorcery spell with mana value X from a graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put to graveyard, exile instead. Okay, so if you can figure out a way to give this flash and then have this enter the battlefield whenever you want, and then pay X as it enters the battlefield, essentially you can play this on your opponent's turn if it has flash, which you need to give it flash, and you can just use it as a counter spell, which is probably what I would do if I was playing this card. Mocking Sprite. Flying, instant or sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. I'm not sure if this is the first time this card was printed or not, but for 3 mana, cards like this are always powerful, and I think that's going to be a staple in Commander going forward. This is going to be a good card. Nettling Nuisance. Flying. Whenever one or more fairies you control deal combat damage to a player, that player creates a 4/2 red pirate creature token with this creature can't block. The token is goaded for the rest of the game. Okay, so each of your opponents are going to create a 4/2 creature to attack with against your other opponents. You know, that's cool. It's a nice way to just force people to attack each other, you know? If you can get copies of Nettling Nuisance onto the battlefield, and whenever multiple creatures you control, whenever one creature's attack a player, they're making 2 of those pirates now, and then you can just kind of flood the board with creatures that way. It's not such a powerful thing, I mean, but it would be funny to see. Scion of Una. Flash, flying, other fairies you control get +1/+1, other fairies you control have Shroud. Okay. The Shroud is good. That means that nobody can target them with spells, not even yourself. Alayla, Cunning Conqueror. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, create a 1/1 black fairy rogue creature token with flying. Okay. Whenever one or more fairies you control deal combat damage to a player, goad target creature that player controls. So more goading. That seems fun. I mean, it's always going to be cool in Commander, and it seems like a deck where people are just going to be attacking each other while you're slowly bringing down their life total. Seems fun. And the fact that this is the card that's creating the tokens, some people might even want to just make this the commander based on, the synergies within the deck, and you probably wanting to have more creature tokens on the battlefield. Blightwing Bandit, Flying Death Touch. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, look at the top card of that player's library, then exile it face down. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. Okay, I mean, it's more of like this milling type strategy within this deck. I'm not sure if that's going to be really that important. I would probably take this card out of the deck. Yeah, Glen Elendra Archmage, guys. This is the reason why you buy this commander deck. It has flying. You can pay a blue to sacrifice the Archmage, and then you can counter a target non-creature spell. This card has persist, so it will then re-enter the battlefield after you sacrifice it with the -1/-1 counter on it so that you can counter something else again. Keeping in mind that when your commander is in play, you can then draw a card and lose a life after you counter a spell, to then draw a card and lose a life after you counter a spell again. To then use the other card inside the deck to get this card out of your graveyard back into your hand to play again. Super powerful card, one of the most annoying cards I think that exists in Commander. This card is so strong that it just warps the entire battlefield around itself, because you just know that they can sacrifice it at any time to counter something, so it really changes the way you play the game. Glen Elendra Liege. Flying, other blue creatures you control get +1/+1, other black creatures get +1/+1. Okay. Malleable Imposter, flash, flying. You may have Malleable Imposter enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature an opponent controls, except it's a fairy, shapeshifter, in addition to its other types, and it has flying. Okay, that's a card. Alright, I might want to play that in another deck. Rankle, Master of Pranks, that's fun. Flying, haste, whenever Rankle, Master of Pranks deals combat damage to a player, choose any number of the following abilities. Each player discards a card, each player loses a life and draws a card, and then each player sacrifices a creature. And if you have a ton of fairy tokens on the battlefield, it's not going to really matter if you choose to sacrifice a creature. This is a good card. The Sower of Temptation. Flying. When Sower of Temptation enters the battlefield, gain control of target creature for as long as Sower of Temptation remains on the battlefield. So you just take one of your opponent's creatures, aka you take their commander. Spell Score and Coven. You can use this as an instant speed spell to return target spell to its owner's hand, or to kind of semi-counter it, or really kind of delay it from being cast again. Whenever Spell Score and Coven enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. Cool. Archmage of Echoes, Flying, Ward 2. Whenever you cast a fairy or a wizard permanent spell, copy it. Yeah, talk about making copies of fairies. This is probably the best card inside the deck, dude. That's a really good card. Not only for fairies, but for wizards, dude. Wizards just got a really powerful buff. This card's gonna be an expensive card, guys. Fairy Formation, flying, you can pay 4 mana to create a fairy token and then draw a card. That's cool. Nimrus Ona's Trickster. This card is so mean. Flash, flying. Whenever you cast your first spell during each opponent's turn, look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put one of those cards into your hand and the other into your graveyard. This card is mean because generally when people play this, it's a counter spell tribal commander deck, and they're countering their opponent's spells so that they can look at the top 2, draw a card to put into the graveyard, and then the next person goes, they counter, and every single time they counter, they draw, which is really not fun, but it's very it's very powerful. So if you want to make the most powerful version of this commander deck, you may want to make Nimrus the commander of this deck. Puppeteer click. Oh, this is a fairy? When Puppeteer click enters the battlefield, put target creature card from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, gains haste. At the beginning of your next step, exile it. It says have persist, so if this dies and re-enters the battlefield, it will do that again. Ona, Queen of the Fae, you have to put this card in the deck. Flying, you can pay X mana and either a blue or a black. Choose a color. Target opponent exiles the top X cards of their library. For each card of the chosen color exiled this way, create a 1/1 blue and black fairy rogue creature token flying. You know, and now it goes back to the reason why they were adding all those mill cards. Really, in this deck, essentially what they're doing, if I could just break things down so far, what I'm noticing is that they're taking staples in fairies and just throwing them into the deck. And what's cool about that is the fact that you can kind of buy this fairy deck and then split the cards apart and then potentially build 2 or maybe even 3 different decks based off of having this one deck, which I think is pretty cool. A Hullbreaker Whore, 7 mana, flash. This spell can't be countered. Okay. Whenever you cast a spell, choose up to 1. Return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Yeah, this card is an absolute bomb of a card. Yeah, this is pretty strong. I think this deck could compete against some of the Commander Masters decks, or maybe even beat the Commander Masters decks. Shadow Puppeteers, flying, ward 2. When Shadow Puppeteer enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 fairies, okay? Whenever a creature you control with flying attacks, you may have it become a red dragon with base power and toughness 4/4 in addition to its other colors and types until the end of turn. Okay, so you turn your fairies into dragons. It's like a damage buff for 7 mana. You know, that seems like a lot of mana, but you know, it's something. If you want to switch your fairies up for dragons, you know, you can do that. You can consider that, because the next card is Consider. Look at the top card of your library, and we'll put that card into your graveyard. You just draw a card. Opt. Okay, you're gonna scry 1, draw a card, good. Arcane Denial, counter target spell. Player who had their spell countered is gonna draw 2 cards at the beginning of the next upkeep, and then the player, which is you, who countered the spell, is gonna draw 1 card at the next upkeep. Reality Shift, exile target creature. Its controller manifests the top card of their library. Cool. Run away together. Choose target creatures controlled by different players. Return those creatures to their owner's hands. Alright. Snap. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Untap up to 2 lands. So this is almost like a free spell. Not really, but kind of, yeah. Spell Stutter. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2+ an additional 1 for each fairy you control. That could be a powerful spell depending on the board state. Frantic Search. Draw 2 cards. Discard 2 cards. And then untap 3 lands. Another one of those spells that are free but not really free. Keep Watch. Draw a card for each attacking creature. And when we're goading things in this deck, that could work out pretty well for you. Reckless Spite. Destroy 2 target non-black creatures. You lose 5 life. You'd be surprised how many creatures in Magic the Gathering when you play are black. So I tend to not really want to play these cards in my commander decks. Personally, I would take this card out of the deck. Next spell we have is Repulse, and it's not showing. This is just a card that says you return target creature to its owner's hand, and then you get to draw a card. Theoretical Duplication. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under opponent's control this turn, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Distant Melody. Choose a creature type, draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. It's gonna draw you a decent number of cards. Fact or Fiction. Reveal the top 5 cards of your library. An opponent separates the cards into 2 piles. Put 1 pile into your hand and the other into your graveyard. It's always a good card. Illusionist Gambit. Cast Illusionist Gambit only during the Declare Blocker step on an opponent's turn. Remove all attacking creatures from combat and untap them. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Each of those creatures attacks that combat if able. They cannot attack you or Planeswalker you control. That's kind of a funny card, actually. Nightmare Unmaking. Choose 1. You can either exile each creature with power greater than the number of cards in your hand, or you can choose exile each creature with power less than the number of cards in your hand. Exile is strong. Perplexing Test. Return all creature tokens to their owner's hands, return all non-token creatures to their owner's hands. And in a token commander deck, this card's pretty good. If you make Alayla the commander, this card suddenly is very strong. Thrilling Encore, put onto the battlefield under your control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from the battlefield this turn. So a good way to recover after a board wipe. Tegwyll's Scouring. You may cast Tegwyll's Scouring as though it had flashed by tapping 3 untapped creatures you control with flying in addition to paying its other costs. So essentially this reads flash, destroy all creatures, create 3 1/1 black fairy creature tokens with flying. Flash speed board wipe for 6 mana, and then you create 3 creature tokens. Okay. Kindred Dominance. Oh wow. Choose a creature type, destroy all creatures that aren't of the chosen type. Yeah, everybody likes a one-sided board wipe. This is a fantastic card. Guys, buy this deck. This is a good card. Like, just to have in your collection, this is just an amazing card. This board wipe goes in every single tribal deck. You know, when these commander decks release, I'm gonna probably buy, depending on the price of this card. If it goes down to like $2, I'm gonna buy maybe $10 worth. So 5 of them. This is a good card. Dig through time. Okay, look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 into your hand. You can delve, so most of the time when you cast a spell, it's gonna be just for 2 blue mana. We have the Soul Ring, good. Wayfarer's Bauble, good. Arcane Signet, good. Dimir Signet, good. Felwar Stone, good. Mind Stone, great. Dominance, good. Notice, this costs 1 mana to play, 1 mana to play, 2 mana, 2 mana, 2 mana, 2 mana, so they're very efficient. Midnight Clock, you can pay 3 mana to put this onto the battlefield and create blue mana. When this gets 12 hour counters, you're gonna exile it, and then you're going to shuffle your graveyard into your library and draw 7 cards. And in decks where we're constantly milling things, that's a good way to kind of reset your game. I've lost a game of Commander to that ability once. Misleading Signpost. This has flash, so you can play this on your opponent's turn. When the signpost enters the battlefield during the declare attacker step, you may reselect which player or permanent target attacking creature is attacking. And you can, you know, go ahead and tap this for a blue mana. I just thought of a lesson that new players are going to be able to learn, but I'll talk about that after we go over this. Reconnaissance Mission. Whenever a creature you control does combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. Okay. Reflections of Litjara. I hope they have some cool new fairy type art for this card. When this enters the battlefield, you choose fairy. Whenever you cast a fairy spell, you're going to copy that spell. Bajuka Bog enters the battlefield, exile a player's graveyard, good. Upchoked Estuary, that's good. Command Tower, good. Darkwater Catacombs, good. This does enter the battlefield tapped, so that's something. Exotic Orchard, okay. Fairy Conclave, this can turn itself into a fairy when it's relevant. Myriad Landscape, cool. Path of Ancestry, enters tapped. Whenever you use the Path of Ancestry to cast a creature spell that's a fairy, you're also going to be able to scry one. You have Secluded Glen. When it comes into play, you can reveal a fairy. If you do, it's going to enter the battlefield untapped. Nice. Sunken Hollow enters the battlefield untapped if you control 2 more basic lands, which is most likely going to happen. Enters untapped, enters tapped, and Temple of the False God. That's good. At $97 is certainly not the most reprint value that you're going to get from one of these commander decks, but look, dude, this deck is made extremely well. It's got some pretty powerful cards inside here, like that Kindred Dominance is an incredibly good card. I also think that the Glen Elendra Archmage is a super powerful card and just warps the game. Dude, and then imagine casting Glen Elendra Archmage while the Reflections of Litjara is on the battlefield, and you're getting essentially 4 counterspells after casting the Glen Elendra. Woof. Yeah, I think if you buy this deck, add like 4 counter spells, take out some of the cards you don't really need, figure out some more ways to make fairy creature tokens, and figure out ways to reliably bring creatures from your graveyard back to your hand. Add some sacrifice outlets inside the deck so that you can draw cards whenever you want, especially sacrifice outlets that give you mana so that you can efficiently play creatures again onto the battlefield. Yeah, this deck is, I would have to rate this deck a 9 out of 10. I think that this deck is going to be incredibly powerful, and I think from the perspective of a new player, a lot of the cards inside this deck have flash. So it's a really good opportunity for new players to be able to purchase this deck and learn what it means to play cards on their opponent's turn. Because, you know, I think as someone who's played Magic for more than 10 years, it's one thing to play Magic on your turn, but the amount of how your skill, like if you only know how to play Magic on your turn, your skill level will be, I'll say it like at a 5. But when you master playing Magic on your opponent's turn, you jump from a 5 up to about a 7, and when you get good at it, you'll be about at an 8, because what it ends up doing is it teaches you how to think about what your opponent's going to do next while you're playing against your opponent. And once you have that understanding and that idea while you're playing Magic the Gathering, you're going to notice that your win rate percentage is going to go a lot higher. So if I was a new player and you want to get good at playing Magic, if you don't care, if you want to have fun, you can still have fun playing this deck. But if you want to be a competitive Magic the Gathering player, I would buy this deck and learn how to play on your opponent's turn. Buy some counter spells, put counter spells inside this deck, learn which spells are you supposed to counter, learn which spells you don't really need to counter, and through this deck, you could become an extremely powerful and extremely skilled Magic the Gathering player. Every 10,000 subscribers this channel receives, I'm going to be giving away an entire sleeved commander deck. All you need to do is make sure that you're subscribed to the channel, and then you need to hit the bell icon, because what's going to happen is I'm going to upload a video the moment we hit 20,000, which is the next goal. I'm going to upload a video announcing which commander and which deck I'm giving away. Everybody that comments on that video is going to enter the giveaway. The only way you're going to know that video is up is if you're paying attention to my subscriber count, or if you get the notification sent to your phone that I uploaded the video. That video is going to be up for 24 hours. After 24 hours, I'm going to pull the video off of YouTube, and all the people that are left there that have commented are the people that enter the giveaway. So if you would like the opportunity to win that commander deck, or you would like to play against that commander deck, tell your friends and share this channel with your friends so that we get as quickly as possible to 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, right? Up to 100,000 even. And even beyond then, every 10,000. And the more people that subscribe, the more money I'm going to have to put into those commander decks. And it could turn into something that's incredibly fun for everybody watching. And honestly, it's fun for me. I really like doing the giveaways. I think the giveaways are hilarious. Also, keep in mind, Wizards of the Coast has sent me a content creator pass to go attend the MagicCon in Las Vegas, Nevada, September 22nd. They also gave me 2 free tickets to just give away. So if you would like to attend MagicCon Las Vegas, or you are already going, let me know, because I have 2 free tickets that I'm giving away to members of the community, okay? Always remember, eat healthy, okay? Work out every single day, even if it's just for 5 minutes, all right? And most importantly, you guys gotta remember to believe in yourself, all right? Peace out, people.